Chapter 7. In the mornings, after breakfast, the team lined up on the parade ground to read orders and get divorced for classes. This was the hardest procedure for Maxim, except for evening tests. Each time, the reading of any orders ended with a real paroxysm of delight, some blind, senseless, unnatural, unfounded, and therefore making the most unpleasant impression on a stranger. Maxim forced himself to suppress his involuntary disgust for this sudden madness, which covered the entire brigade, from commander to last candidate. He persuaded himself that he simply could not afford such intense attention from the guards to the activities of the brigade office. He scolded himself for the skepticism of a foreigner and a stranger, tried to be inspired himself, mentally insisted that in difficult conditions such explosions of mass enthusiasm say only about people's cohesion, their unanimity and their willingness to fully devote themselves to the common cause. But it was very difficult for him. Since childhood, brought up in a restrained and ironic attitude towards himself, in dislike for loud words in general and solemn choral singing in particular, he was almost angry at his comrades, at the guys, kind, simple-minded, generally excellent guys, when they suddenly, after reading an order to punish the candidate with 3 days of punishment, the name of the candidate for bickering with a real person like that, they opened their mouths, lost their usual good-naturedness and sense of humor and began to cry enthusiastically cheers, and then sang March of the Battle Guard with tears in their eyes and repeated it twice, 3 times, and sometimes 4 times. At the same time, even cooks poured out of the brigade kitchen and enthusiastically picked them up, waving scoops and knives frantically, since they were out of order. Remembering that you should be like everyone else in this world, Maxim also sang and also tried to lose his sense of humor, and he succeeded, but it was disgusting, because he himself was not enthusiastic, but only awkward. This time, an outburst of enthusiasm followed order number 127 to make full Private Dimba a corporal, order 128, thanking full Private Sim for his courage in the operation, and order number 129 to transfer the 4th Company barracks for repairs. As soon as the brigadier adjutant put the order sheets into his leather tablet, the foreman, taking off his cap, took his chest full of air and shouted in a creaky falsetto, "Combat! Guard! Heavy!" And it went and it went. Today was particularly awkward because Maxim saw tears rolling down Captain Chachu's dark cheeks. The guards roared with bulls, beating off the beat with their butts on massive belt buckles. In order not to see or hear this, Maxim closed his eyes more tightly and roared in a hot tahorg, and his voice covered all his voices, at least that's what he thought. "Go ahead, fearless," he cried, hearing no one else but himself. What idiotic words. A corporal must have composed it. You have to love what you do to fight with such words. He opened his eyes and saw a flock of black birds rushing loudly and silently over the parade ground. A diamond shell will not save you, O enemy. Then it all ended as suddenly as it had begun. The brigadier looked around the building with impressive eyes, remembered where he was, and in a sobbing, broken voice commanded, "Gentlemen officers, take their companies to classes." The guys, shaking their heads, were dumbfounded at each other. They didn't seem to understand anything, and Captain Chuck had to shout "Equal up" twice before the ranks took their proper form. The company was then taken to the barracks, and the captain ordered. The first section is assigned to the convoy. The rest of the sections will start their classes as usual. Our disperse. We split up. Guy built his own section and distributed posts. Maxim and Real Private Ponde got a post in an interrogation cell. Guy hastily explained to him the duties: to stand still to the right and behind the arrested person, at the slightest attempt to get up from the bench, to prevent him by force, obey directly to the brigade commander, the elder, Private Pandy. Anyway, look at Pondy and do like him. I would never appoint you to this post, a candidate should not, but Mr. Captain ordered. Keep your ears open, Mac. Something I don't understand, Mr. Captain. Either he wants to promote you as soon as possible, he really liked you in action. Yesterday, when analyzing the operation with section commanders, he talked a lot about you, and sent you to order. Or is he testing you? I don't know why this is so. Maybe it's my fault with my report, or maybe it's your own talkers. He looked at Maxim with concern. Clean your boots again, pull up your belt and put on your dress gloves. Yes, you don't have it, candidates are not supposed to. Okay, run to the warehouse, let's live, we'll be out in 30 minutes. At the warehouse, Maxim found Pondy changing a cracked cockade. Wow, Corporal, said Pondy, addressing the warehouse manager and patting Maxim on the shoulder. Vidal? It's the 9th day, the guy's in the guard, and thanks. They put him in the cell with me. Must have come for white gloves? Give him good gloves, Corporal, he deserves it. The guy is a nail. The corporal grumbled unhappily, climbed into the shelves littered with clothes, threw several pairs of white thread gloves onto the counter in front of Maxim and said disdainfully. Nail. You're the one here with the crazy ones, nails. Of course, when his interior is cracked in pain, come and put it in a bag. My grandfather would be the nail here too. No arms, no legs. Pondy was offended. Your grandfather would ask without arms and legs on his eyebrows alone, he said, if he were hit like this with 2 pistols. I thought, Kyuk to Mr. Captain. Kyuk, Kyuk. Grumbled the corporal. If you'll rush to the southern border in 6 months, then we'll see who will run on your eyebrows. When they left the warehouse, Maxim asked with all kinds of reverence. Old Pondy loved reverence. Mr. Pondy, why are these geeks in so much pain? And everyone at once. How is this so? Out of fear, said Pondy, lowering his voice for importance. Geeks, you know? You should read more, Mac. There is a brochure called Geeks, who they are, and where they come from. Read it, or you'll stay as a village. Courage alone won't get you far. He paused. So we're worried, for example, we're angry, let's say, or we're afraid, we're okay, we'll just sweat, or, say, our veins will shake. And their body is abnormal, degenerate. He is angry at someone, or, for example, chickens out, or even. He immediately has severe pain in his head and all over his body. To the point of unconsciousness, got it? This is why we recognize them and, of course, detain them. Take them. And the gloves are good, just right for me. What do you think? They are too tight for me, Mr. Pondy, Maxim complained. Let's change, you take these and give me yours, worn out. Pondy was very happy. And Maxim was very happy. And suddenly he remembered Funk writhing in his car, driving in pain. And being picked up by patrol guards. Just what could Funk be scared of? And who could he be mad at there? After all, he was not worried, he was driving quietly, whistled, he really wanted something. Probably to smoke. However, did he turn around and saw a patrol car? Or was that after? Yes, he was in a hurry and the van was blocking the road. Maybe he got mad? No, what am I making up? You never know what kind of seizures people have. And he was detained for the accident. I wonder, however, where did he take me and who is he? Funk should be found. He polished his boots, cleaned himself up in front of the large mirror, hung a gun around his neck, looked in the mirror again, and then Guy ordered him to build. After meticulously looking around everyone and checking his knowledge of duties, Guy ran to the company office to report. While he was away, the guards played soap, told 3 stories from a soldier's life that Maxim did not understand due to his ignorance of some specific expressions, then bothered Maxim to tell him where he was so hefty. This had become a common joke in the section, and asked him to roll a couple of coins into a tube as a souvenir. Then Captain Chachu left the office, accompanied by Guy. He also looked at everyone meticulously, walked away, telling Guy, lead a section, corporal, and the section headed for headquarters. At headquarters, the captain ordered Real Private Pondy and Candidate Sim to follow him, and Guy took the others away. They entered a small room with tightly curtained windows that smelled of tobacco and cologne. At the far end, there was a huge empty table, soft chairs were placed around the table, and a darkened painting on the wall depicting an ancient battle, horses, tight uniforms, naked sabers, and lots of white smoke. 10 steps from the table and to the right of the door, Maxim saw an iron stool with a perforated seat. The legs of the stool were screwed to the floor with hefty bolts. "Get up," the captain commanded, walked forward and sat down at the table. Pandey carefully placed Maxim on the right and behind the stool, stood on the left and whispered at attention. And he and Maxim froze. The captain sat with his foot on his leg, smoked and looked at the guards indifferently. He was very indifferent, but Maxim clearly felt that the captain was watching him and only him closely. Then the door opened behind Pandey's back. Pandey immediately took 2 steps forward, 1 step to the right and a turn to the left. Maxim jerked too, but realized that he was not on the road and that did not apply to him, so he just rolled his eyes away. After all, there was something contagious about this adult game, despite its primitive nature and its obvious irrelevance in the plight of an inhabited island. The captain got up, extinguishing his cigarette in the ashtray, and with a slight click of his heels, greeted the foreman, a stranger in civilian clothes and a brigadier adjutant with a thick folder under his arm, walking to the table. The foreman sat down at the table in the middle, his face was sour and dissatisfied, and he put his finger under his sewn collar, pulled it back and twisted his head. A civilian, plain little man, poorly shaven, with a flaccid yellowish face, sat down next to him, moving silently. The brigadier adjutant, without sitting down, opened the file and began to sort through the papers, handing some of them over to the foreman. Pandey, standing a little hesitant, returned to his place with the same clear movements. They talked softly at the table. "Will you be at the meeting today, Chachu?" the foreman asked. "I'm busy," the captain replied, after smoking a new cigarette. "In vain. There's a debate there today. We realized it too late. I have already spoken about this." "Not in the best way," the civilian captain said softly to the captain. "In addition, circumstances are changing, opinions are changing. This is not the case in our guard," the captain said dryly. "Really, gentlemen," said the foreman in a capricious voice, "let's meet at the meeting today." "I heard fresh shrimp have been brought," the adjutant said, continuing to rummage through the papers. "With a beer, huh?" Captain, supported him by his civilian clothes. "No, gentlemen," said the captain. "I have one opinion, and I have already expressed it. As for beer." He added something else incomprehensible. The whole company laughed, and Captain Chachu sat back in his chair with a happy look. Then the adjutant stopped rummaging through the papers, leaned down to the foreman and whispered something to him. The brigadier was leaving. The adjutant sat down and said, as if addressing an iron stool, "Noel Renato." Pandey pushed the door, leaned out, and repeated loudly into the hallway, "Noel Renato." There was movement in the hallway, and an elderly, well-dressed but crumpled and angry man entered the room. His legs are slightly twisted. Pandey took him by the elbow and put him on a stool. The door clicked and closed. The man cleared his throat loudly, put his hands on his knees spread apart and raised his head proudly. "Taah," said the foreman, looking at the papers, and suddenly began to use a tongue twister. "Nola Renato, 56 years old, homeowner, graduate member." Yeah. "Veteran club member, membership card number so and so." The civilian yawned, covering his mouth with his hand, pulled out a colorful magazine from his pocket, put it on his lap, and began to flip through. He was detained then somewhere. Seized during the search. "That's it. What were you doing at number 8 on Trumpet Street?" "I am the owner of this house," Renato said with dignity. "I have consulted with my manager." "Have the documents been verified?" The foreman turned to the adjutant. "That's right. It's all right." "Well," said the brigadier. "Tell me, Mr. Renato, do you know any of those arrested?" "No," Renato said. He shook his head vigorously. "How? However, one of them's last name is Ketchef. I think a certain Ketchef lives in my house." But I don't remember. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe not in this house of mine. I have 2 more houses, one of them. It's my fault, the civilian interrupted, without looking up from the magazine. And what were the rest of the detainees talking about in the cell? Did you not pay attention to? Said to Renard. I must confess. You've got, insects in there. So we're mostly talking about them. Someone was whispering in the corner, but I must admit it wasn't up to. And then, I don't like these people very much, I'm a veteran. I preferred to deal with insects, he. Of course, the foreman agreed. Well, we don't apologize, Mr. Renato. Here are your documents, you're free. Convoy chief, he said, raising his voice. Pandey opened the door and shouted. Convoy chief, to the foreman. There can be no question of any apologies, Renato said important. It's my only fault, I'm the only one. And not even me, but damn heredity. Would you allow it? He turned to Maxim, pointing to the table where the documents were lying. Sit down, said Pandey softly. Guy came in. The foreman handed him the documents, ordered Mr. Renard to return the seized property, and Mr. Renato was released. In Ayu province, said the civilian thoughtfully, there is a custom. Every geek, I mean legal geeks, is taxed when detained. A voluntary contribution to the guard. This is not accepted here, said the foreman coldly. In my opinion, this is illegal. Let's go next, he ordered. Rash Musai, the adjutant said to the iron stool. Rash Musai, Pandey repeated through the open door. Rasha Musai turned out to be a thin, completely tortured man wearing a shabby bathrobe and one shoe. As soon as he sat down, the foreman, filled with blood, yelled, "Are you hiding, bastard?" To which Rasha Musai began to explain in words and confusingly that he was not hiding at all, that he had a sick wife and 3 children, that his apartment was not large, that he had already been detained and released twice, that he was working in a factory, a furniture maker, that he was not to blame for anything, and Maxim was already expecting to be released, but the foreman suddenly got up and announced that Rasha Musai, 42 years old, married, a worker with 2 detentions who violated an expulsion order, was sentenced under the Prevention Act to 7 years of educational work, followed by a ban living in central districts. For about a minute, Rash Musai thought about this verdict, and then a terrible scene took place. The unfortunate furniture maker cried, pleaded inconsistently for forgiveness, tried to fall to his knees, and kept screaming and crying as Pandey drove him out into the hallway. And Maxim again caught Captain Chachu's close gaze. Kiwi Popshu, said the adjutant. A shoulder-headed guy with a face mutilated by a skin disease was pushed through the door. The guy turned out to be a repeat offender apartment thief, was captured at the crime scene and acted brazenly. He either began to beg his bosses not to put him to death, then suddenly giggled hysterically, let go of his spiciness and started telling stories from his life that all started the same way, I'm going to the same house. He didn't let anyone talk. The foreman, after several unsuccessful attempts to ask a question, sat back in his chair and looked indignantly to the right and left of him. Captain Chachu said in an even voice. Candidate Sim, shut his mouth up. Maxim didn't know how to shut his mouth, so he just took Kiwi Popsha by the shoulder and shook it a couple of times. Kiwi Popsha's jaws clanged, bit his tongue and fell silent. Then the civilian, who had been watching the arrested man with interest for a long time, said, I'll take this one. It will come in handy. Great, said the foreman and ordered Kiwi Popsha to be sent back to his cell. When the boy was taken out, the adjutant said, That's all the rubbish. Now the band will go. Start right with the manager, advised the civilian. How is his, Ketchef? The adjutant looked into the papers and said to the iron stool. Gal Ketchef. They introduced a friend, a man in a white coat. He was handcuffed and therefore held his arms unnaturally stretched out in front of him. His eyes were red and his face was swollen. He sat down and looked at the painting over the foreman's head. Is your name Gal Ketchef? asked the foreman. Yes. A dentist? It was. What is your relationship with Dennis Goby? I bought an internship from him. Why don't you practice? I sold my office. Why? Circumstances are tight, Ketchef said. What is your relationship with brigadier? She is my wife. Do you have kids? It was. A son. Where is he? I don't know. What did you do during the war? I fought. Where? By whom? In the Southwest. First as the head of the field hospital, then as the commander of an infantry company. Wounds? Orders? It all happened. Why did you decide to engage in anti-state activities? Because there has never been a more disgusting state in the history of the world, Ketchef said. Because he loved his wife and child. Because you killed my friends and molested my people. Because I've always hated you. Is it enough? Enough, said the foreman calmly. More than enough. Would you rather tell us how much do the people of Connie pay you? Or is Pandia paying you? The man wearing the white coat laughed. It was an awful laugh, that's how a dead man could laugh. Stop this comedy, brigadier, he said. Why do you need this? Are you a team leader? Yes. It was. Who can you name among the members of the organization? No one. Are you sure? Suddenly a man in civilian clothes asked. Yes. You see, Ketchef, said the man in civilian clothes softly, you're in an extremely difficult situation. We know everything about your band. We even know a thing or two about your group's connections. You should understand that we received this information from someone, and now it's up to us whether that person's name will be Ketchef or something else. Ketchef kept silent with his head down. You, Captain Chachu croaked. You, a former military officer. Do you understand what you're being offered? Not life, Masaraksh. An honor. Ketchef laughed again, coughed, but said nothing. Maxim felt that this man was not afraid of anything. No death, no shame. He's been through it already. He already thinks he's dead and embarrassed. The brigadier looked at the civilian clothes. He shook his head. The foreman shrugged his shoulders, stood up and announced that Gal Ketchef, 50, a married dentist, was being sentenced to destruction under the Public Health Act. The term of execution of the sentence is 48 hours. The sentence may be commuted if the sentenced person agrees to testify. When Ketchef was taken out, the foreman gladly said to the civilian, I don't understand you. I think he was quite willing to talk. A typical talker, according to your own classification. I don't understand. The civilian laughed. That's why, buddy, you command the brigade, and I'm at home. Anyway, said the foreman offended. The team leader tends to philosophize. I don't understand. Buddy, said the civilian, have you ever seen a philosophizing dead man? Oh, nonsense, but still? Maybe you saw it? Asked the foreman. Yes, just now, said the civilian vehemently. And mind you, this is not the first time. I'm alive, he's dead, what should we talk about? So it seems that Werbleiben has it? Captain Chachu suddenly got up, came close to Maxim and hissed in his face from the bottom up, how are you, candidate? Where are you looking? Smyrna. Eyes in front of you. Don't run around with your eyes. For a few seconds, he breathed noisily and looked at Maxim, his pupils were narrowing and dilating wildly, then returned to his place and lit a cigarette. Well, said the adjutant. The only thing left is brigadier, Memo Gramenu, and two others who refused to identify themselves. Let's start with them, suggested the civilian. Call them. Number 73 is 13, said the adjutant. Number 73 to 13 came in and sat down on a stool. He was also handcuffed, although one of his arms was artificial, a dry, veiny man with painfully thick lips that were swollen from bites. What is your name? Asked the foreman. Which one? The one-armed man asked merrily. Maxim even shuddered, he was sure that the one-armed man would keep silent. Do you have a lot of them? Then name the real one. My real name is number 73, 13. Ta-ak. What were you doing at Ketchef's apartment? He was fainting. FYI, I'm very good at this. Would you like me to show you? Don't work hard, said the man in civilian clothes. He was very angry. You're going to need this skill again. The one-armed man suddenly laughed. He laughed loudly and loudly, like a young man, and Maxim was horrified to realize that he was laughing sincerely. People at the table silently listened to this laugh like petrified. Masaraksh, said the one-armed man at last, wiping his tears with his shoulder. Well, the threat. But you're still a young man. All the archives were burned after the coup, and you don't even know what you shredded them all to. It was a big mistake to destroy old staff. They would teach you how to take your duties calmly. You're too emotional. You hate it too much. And your work should be done as dry as possible, publicly, for money. This makes a huge impression on the defendant. It's terrible when you're tortured not by an enemy, but by an official. Just look at my left hand. It was sawn off for me in good pre-war guards, in 3 steps, and each act was accompanied by extensive correspondence. The executioners did hard, thankless work, they were bored, they sawed my hand and scolded my miserable salaries. And I was scared. It was only with a very strong willpower that I kept from talking at the time. And now, I can see how much you hate me. You're me, I'm you. Great. But you've hated me for less than 20 years, and I've hated you for over 30 years. At that time, you were walking under the table and torturing cats, young man. Oh, said the civilian. The old crow. Worker's friend. I thought you've all been killed already. Don't hope so, said the one-armed man. You still have to understand the world where you live. Otherwise you all imagine you've cancelled the old story and started a new one. Terrible ignorance, nothing to talk to you about. I think it's enough, said the brigadier, addressing the civilian. He quickly wrote something in a magazine and let the foreman read it. The foreman was very surprised, drummed his fingers on his chin and looked doubtfully at the civilian. The civilian smiled. Then the foreman shrugged his shoulders, thought and turned to the captain. Witness Chachu, how did the accused behave during the arrest? I was lying around with his hooves back, said the captain gloomily. So he did not resist. Ta. The brigadier thought a little more, got up and announced the verdict. Accused number 73-13 is sentenced to death. The term of execution of the sentence is not determined, and from now on, the accused has to spend educational work until the sentence is executed. Captain Chachu's face was contemptuous bewilderment, and the one-armed man, when he was taken out, laughed softly and shook his head, as if to say, well. Then the number 73-14 was entered. This was the same person who screamed on the floor. He was fearful but defiant. Right from the doorstep, he shouted that he would not answer and did not want leniency. He was really silent and did not answer a single question, not even a civilian question. Are there any complaints about ill treatment? The foreman ended up looking at the civilian clothes and shouting questioningly. The civilian nodded and said, yes, to me. He seemed very happy. Then the foreman went through the remaining papers and said, let's go, gentlemen, let's eat. Impossible. The court left, and Maxim and Pandey were allowed to stand free. When the captain also came out, Pandey said, did you see bastards? Worse than snakes, by God. After all, what is the main thing? They don't have headaches, so how would you know they're geeks? It's scary to think what would happen then. Maxim kept silent. He didn't want to talk. The picture of the world, which seemed so logical and distinct a day ago, is now blurred and has lost its shape. However, Pandey didn't need lines. After taking off his gloves so as not to get dirty, he took a candy bag out of his pocket, treated Maxim to him and began to tell him how much he hates this post. First of all, it was scary to get infected by geeks. Secondly, some of them, like this one-armed one, acted so brazenly that they didn't have the strength to hit the neck. Once he put up with it like this, and then he gave it, he was almost demoted as a candidate. Thanks to the captain, I defended it. He was imprisoned only for 20 days and another 40 days without dismissal. Maxim sucked candy, listened half-heartedly and kept silent. Hate, he thought. They hate these ones, these hate those. For what? The most disgusting state. Why? Where did he get this from? People were molested. How? What could this mean? And this civilian? He can't be referring to torture. It was a long time ago, in the Middle Ages. However, fascism. Yes, I remember, not only in medium-sized ones. Could it be a fascist state? Masarach, what is fascism? Aggression, race theory. Gilter? No, Gilmer. Yes, the theory of racial superiority, mass destruction, genocide, the seizure of the world. Political lies, state lies, I remember this very well, it amazed me the most. But I don't think it's here. Is Guy a fascist? And Rada? No, this is different, the consequences of the war, the obvious cruelty of morals as a result of the difficult situation. The majority seeks to suppress minority opposition. Death penalty, penal servitude. This is disgusting to me, but how could it be otherwise? And what exactly is the opposition? Yes, they hate the current system. But what exactly do they do? Not a word was said about it. Weird. As if the judges conspired with the accused in advance, and the defendants have nothing against. Well, it looks very similar. The accused are trying to destroy the anti-ballistic protection system, the judges are well aware of this, and the accused know that the judges are well aware of this, everyone remains convinced, there is nothing to talk about, and all that remains is to formalize the relationship. Destroy one, another to educate, a third. A third for some reason this civilian takes over. Now it would be good to understand the connection between a sore head and addiction to the opposition. Why do only geeks seek to destroy the PBZ system? And yet not all are geeks? Mr. Pandey, he said, and the Kanchans are all geeks, haven't you heard? Pandey thought deeply. How do you understand? He finally said. We're mainly about internal affairs, about geeks, both urban and wild, that are in the South. And what is there in Handy or, let's say, anywhere else, this is probably what the army men are training. The main thing you should know is that the Khani people are the worst external enemies of our state. They obeyed us before the war, but now they are viciously taking revenge. And geeks are internal enemies. That's it. Got it? More or less, said Maxim, and Pandy immediately reprimanded him. The guard doesn't answer that way, the guard answers that's right or no way, and more or less is a civilian expression. You can answer this way to a corporal sister, but here's the service, you can't do that here. He would probably have ranted for a long time, the topic was grateful, close to his heart, and the listener was attentive and respectful, but then gentlemen officers returned. Pandy fell silent in mid-sentence, whispered quietly, and after making the necessary evolutions between the table and the iron stool, froze. Maxim froze too. Gentlemen officers were in a great mood. Captain Chachu loudly and disdainfully described how in 1984 they sculpted raw dough directly onto hot armor and licked their fingers. The brigadier and the civilian objected that the guard's spirit was the guard's spirit, but the guard's cuisine should be up to par, and the less canned food the better. The adjutant, half closed his eyes, suddenly began to quote a cookbook by heart, and everyone fell silent and listened to him for a long time with a strange tenderness on their faces. Then the adjutant drowned and coughed, and the foreman sighed and said, "Yes. But we must stop." The adjutant, still coughing, opened the file, dug through the papers, and said in a choked voice, "Ordi tot air." And a woman came in, as white and almost transparent as yesterday, as if she were still fainting, but when Pandy, as usual, held out his hand to grab her elbow and sit her down, she suddenly moved away like a reptile, and Maxim thought she was about to hit her. She did not hit her, her hands were shackled, She only said clearly, "Don't touch it, lackey," walked around Pondy and sat on the stool. The foreman asked her the usual questions. She didn't answer. The civilian reminded her of the child, of her husband, and she did not answer him either. She sat straightened up. Maxim did not see her face, only saw her tight, thin neck under her disheveled blonde hair. Then she suddenly said in a calm, low voice, "You're all duped idiots. Killers. You're all going to die. You, brigadier, I don't know you, I'm seeing you for the first and last time. You're going to die a bad death. Not at my hands, unfortunately, but in a very, very bad death. And you, security jerk. I killed 2 people like you by myself. I would kill you right now, I would get to you if it weren't for these lackeys behind me." She took a breath. "And you, black-faced, cannon fodder, executioner, will still fall into our hands. But you're just going to die. Gal missed it, but I know people who won't. You're all going to die here long before we knock down your damn towers, which is good. I pray to God that you don't survive your towers, or you'll get smarter and those who come after that will feel sorry for killing you." They didn't interrupt her, they listened intently. You'd think they'd listened to her for hours, and she suddenly got up and stepped to the table, but Pandy caught her by the shoulder and threw her back onto the stool. Then she spat with all her might, but the spit didn't make it to the table, and she suddenly went limp and started crying. They watched her cry for a while. Then the foreman got up and sentenced her to be destroyed at 48 o'clock, and Pandy took her by the elbow and kicked her out the door, and the civilian man rubbed his hands hard, smiled and said to the foreman, "That's good luck. It's a great cover." And the foreman answered him, "Thank the captain." And Captain Chachu only said, "Languages," and everyone fell silent. Then the adjutant summoned Memo Gramina, and they didn't stand on ceremony at all. This was the man who shot in the hallway. Everything was clear to him. When he was arrested, he offered armed resistance and he was not even asked questions. He sat on a stool, heavy and hunched over, and while the foreman read him the death sentence, he looked indifferently at the ceiling, babysitting his right hand, whose sprained fingers were wrapped in a rag. Maxim felt a sense of unnatural calm, some kind of businesslike confidence, cold indifference to what was happening, but he could not understand his feelings. Grauman had not yet been taken out, and the adjutant was relieved to put the papers in the folder. The foreman started talking to the civilian clothes about the order process, and Captain Chachu approached Pandy and Maxim and ordered them to go. Maxim clearly saw the mockery and threat in his transparent eyes, but did not want to think about it. With a certain estranged curiosity and compassion, he thought about the man who was about to kill a woman. It was terrible, it was impossible, but someone had to do it in the next 48 hours.